The mountain waits, silent, unyielding, yet beneath its marble temples, the earth trembles. Not from quake or storm, but from something older, darker. Smoke seeps through cracks in stone, thick with a sweetness that numbs the tongue and steals the breath. A woman sits above the abyss. Her eyes roll white, her lips move, not in words, but in riddles, half sung, half screamed. Kings kneel here. Warriors stake empires on syllables born of delirium. Crops are planted, wars ignited, thrones secured. All because of the convulsions of one trembling priestess. She inhales, she sways, she speaks, and Greece listens as though the gods themselves have thundered through her bones. Yet the ground beneath her hides a truth. The stone floor leaks poison. Fault lines whisper gas into the air, flooding her mind with visions sharp enough to cut reality. Still, armies march. Blood spills. History bends. Some say Apollo spoke here. Others call it geology wrapped in ritual. But the Pythia, perched above the void, never cared for mortal doubts. Her words were law. And as smoke curled through the sanctuary of Delphi, the fate of nations hung on the tremor of her next breath. Delphi stood where stone and sky converged, high on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, an ancient sanctuary carved into the Greek landscape with precision and reverence. To the Greeks, it was more than a sacred site. It was the navel of the world, the omphalos, a point where heaven and earth touched. Here, mythology and history fused so tightly that neither could be told without the other. The origins of this place reach back to the Mycenaean period, around the 14th century BCE, when small offerings were left at a rugged hillside altar to unnamed deities. Long before the cult of Apollo took form, Mycenaean Delphi was not yet the marble sanctuary of later centuries. Archaeological evidence, shards of pottery, small figurines, and traces of early shrines, reveals a place of rural worship. A people on the threshold of organized religion knelt before forces they could not name, leaving gifts of grain, figurines, and oil in shallow earth pits. The sanctuary grew alongside Mycenaean power, reflecting a society that looked to the mountains not just for shelter but for contact with the divine. The transformation of Delphi began with myth but was anchored in ritual and political necessity. Greek tradition held that Zeus released two eagles from opposite ends of the earth, and where they met, above Delphi, marked the center of the world. There, a stone called the omphalos was placed, a carved marker still preserved today, representing the cosmic axis. Yet the sanctuary's defining myth revolved around Apollo and his triumph over the serpent Python. Ancient poets spoke of this colossal serpent as a guardian of the site, a creature of the earth itself, slain by Apollo with his arrows. From that moment, the god claimed the sanctuary, purging the earthborn menace and replacing it with the precision of oracles, hymns, and order. By the 8th century BCE, Delphi had become an established sanctuary of Apollo, drawing worshippers from every corner of the Greek world. Pilgrims climbed its sacred slope bearing offerings, tripods of bronze, treasures of silver and gold, and dedicatory inscriptions carved with the names of kings and city-states. These were not acts of mere piety. They were political statements, declarations of allegiance to the god whose word could crown kings or doom entire armies. The sanctuary itself grew into a complex of shrines, altars, and treasuries. The most significant was the Temple of Apollo, rebuilt several times over the centuries after fires and earthquakes reduced earlier structures to ruins. The archaic temple, built around 510 BCE, stood on massive foundations, with a Doric colonnade and sculpted pediments depicting Apollo's myths. Below it lay the sacred spring of Castalia, where supplicants washed themselves in icy water before entering the presence of the god. Purification was not symbolic, it was mandatory. The divine would not speak through the unclean. It was here that mortals came to seek guidance. Not vague comfort, not abstract hope. Guidance on war, colonization, law, sacrifice, and survival. Every consultation began with ritual precision. Offerings burned on the altar, prayers sung in measured tones, laurel leaves chewed to signify Apollo's favor. Then the question, always phrased carefully, for the oracle's words could be as dangerous as they were divine. Kings and generals stood where farmers and exiles stood, all equal before the mouthpiece of Apollo. Historical records detail the sanctuary's role in shaping the Greek world. Before launching campaigns, leaders came to Delphi, sometimes walking for weeks along the sacred way, bearing gifts to secure the god's favor. Colonists sailing west toward Italy and Sicily sought the oracle's counsel on where to build their cities. Their futures were bound to the pronouncements given here. A single cryptic phrase could redirect the course of history. It was from Delphi, for instance, that the Spartans received the chilling proclamation before the Persian invasion of 480 BCE. Either your city will be destroyed, or one of your kings must die. Leonidas marched to Thermopylae soon after. Yet even amid such grandeur, the site never lost its primal quality. The rocks that cradled the temple were fissured, cut by ancient faults that released faint vapors. Ancient sources, Plutarch among them, speak of sweet-smelling fumes that drifted from cracks in the floor of Apollo's chamber, intoxicating the priestess who spoke the god's will. While modern geology suggests that ethylene gas or similar hydrocarbons may have seeped upward, inducing trance-like states, the ancients saw only divine breath, Apollo himself speaking through the earth. Delphi's sanctity extended beyond its prophecies. It was a place of festivals, music, and athletic competition. The Pythian Games, second only to the Olympics in prestige, were held every 4 years to honor Apollo's victory over Python. Musicians, poets, and athletes came to prove their skill, each performance another offering to the god whose voice ruled kings and shaped destinies. Throughout the 6th to 4th centuries BCE, Delphi reached its height as the religious and political nerve center of Greece. City-states competed not just for Apollo's favor but for prominence within the sanctuary. The treasuries, small but lavish buildings erected along the sacred way, served as both religious offerings and civic monuments. The treasury of the Athenians, built after their victory at Marathon in 490 BCE, gleamed with sculpted panels commemorating their triumph over Persia. Here, religion, politics, and art merged seamlessly. Yet for all its grandeur, Delphi's heart remained the same, a place where mortals confronted the unknowable, a sanctuary where a simple question, posed by a trembling petitioner, could ripple across nations and centuries. The myths of Zeus and Apollo, the grandeur of marble temples, the faint, intoxicating vapors rising from beneath the stone, all converged in a single purpose, to channel the voice of the divine into human affairs. Even as empires rose and fell around it, Delphi maintained this singular role. Macedonian kings, including Philip II, offered gifts to the sanctuary, seeking Apollo's counsel before their campaigns. The site's influence reached as far as Anatolia, North Africa, and beyond, drawing offerings from foreign lands. Each step up the sacred way reinforced the weight of history, each carved inscription a fragment of decision made at the god's threshold. The sanctuary was not merely built on stone, it was built on human need. The need to know, to ask, to plead with powers beyond comprehension. And for centuries, Delphi answered. The Pythia was no ordinary priestess. She was the human vessel of Apollo, the singular channel through which a god's voice entered the affairs of mortals. Her presence transformed the sanctuary of Delphi from a sacred site into the epicenter of decision-making for the ancient Greek world. Yet her role was not born of superstition alone. It was rooted in ritual precision, strict qualifications, and practices refined across centuries. The selection of the Pythia carried weight equal to the office she would hold. In the earliest traditions, sources suggest that a young virgin served as Apollo's medium, a choice reflecting the ideal of purity associated with divine possession. But as the sanctuary's fame grew and the influx of powerful petitioners increased, this practice changed. By the 6th century BCE, the position was reserved for mature women, typically beyond childbearing years, often selected from local families of unimpeachable reputation. This shift followed an incident, recorded in later accounts, where a young Pythia was abducted, evidence that the role, even then, carried immense prestige and vulnerability. Thereafter, older women were chosen but dressed in maiden-like attire, preserving symbolic continuity while ensuring personal safety. Service as Pythia was lifelong, though historical evidence suggests that during particularly busy periods, especially in the height of Delphi's influence between the 6th and 4th centuries BCE. Multiple women may have been appointed to share the sacred duty. Plutarch, who served as a priest at Delphi in the late 1st century CE, mentions 2 and at times 3 Pythias officiating simultaneously, a sign of the oracle's enduring demand well into the Roman era. The ritual of consultation began long before the priestess entered her trance. Purification was the first law of Delphi. Before any session, the Pythia bathed in the waters of the Castalian spring, located just east of the sanctuary, its cold flow cascading from the slopes of Parnassus. Ritual texts describe this act not as symbolic cleansing, but as an essential rite to prepare both body and mind for divine contact. Laurel leaves, sacred to Apollo, were chewed by the priestess and burned upon the altar, their sharp fragrance mingling with the faint, sweet vapors rising from fissures in the rock beneath the temple. The Pythia then descended into the Adyton, the restricted inner chamber of the Temple of Apollo, a place forbidden to ordinary mortals. Here, over a natural chasm, she took her seat upon a sacred tripod, its bronze frame resting above the cleft in the earth from which the vapors rose. Ancient writers such as Plutarch, Strabo, and Pausanias reference this phenomenon, though its exact nature has been debated. Geological studies conducted in the late 20th century revealed 2 fault lines intersecting beneath the site, releasing light hydrocarbons, possibly ethylene gas, known to induce trance states and feelings of euphoria when inhaled. The ancients, however, interpreted this not as chemistry but as divinity, the literal breath of Apollo rising from the underworld. The moment of inspiration, the divine mania as Plato would call it, was the most enigmatic stage of the ritual. Contemporary accounts vary. Some describe the Pythia speaking in disjointed cries, others in flowing hexameters, but all agree that her utterances carried a power beyond human reason. Her words were recorded by temple priests known as prophetae, who framed the often ambiguous statements into the structured, sometimes poetic responses presented to petitioners. This interpretive step was crucial, for Apollo was known to speak in riddles, ensuring that human choice, fate tempered by free will, remained at the center of his counsel. Historical records provide striking examples of this cryptic clarity. When King Croesus of Lydia sought guidance before waging war against Persia around 546 BCE, the oracle famously declared, "If you cross the Halys, you will destroy a great empire." Croesus assumed it referred to Persia. The empire destroyed was his own. Such pronouncements were neither random nor careless. They were crafted, or perhaps inspired, to preserve divine mystery while influencing the course of events. The Pythia did not operate continuously throughout the year. Consultations were traditionally limited to the 7th day of each month, Apollo's sacred day, and only during the 9 warmer months when the god was believed to dwell at Delphi. During the winter, Apollo was said to depart for Hyperborea, a mythical northern land, leaving the sanctuary silent. Even within the active months, the Pythia could speak only once a day. The strain of trance and possession was profound, and ancient testimonies suggest the physical toll could be severe. Yet the authority of her pronouncements was rarely questioned. Leaders from city-states across Greece, Sparta, Athens, Corinth, and beyond approached Delphi not simply for reassurance but for instruction before decisions that shaped history. Colonization of Magna Graecia, wars against Persia, the founding of laws, each carried the echo of a Pythian phrase. Inscriptions at the sanctuary commemorate these consultations, alongside offerings from grateful cities and victorious generals. Each dedicatory gift a silent testament to the weight carried by the trembling voice of one seated above the fissure. Her role extended beyond politics. Individuals sought guidance on matters of ritual purification, health, and divine appeasement. The oracle mediated between mortal uncertainty and divine will, a function that philosophers such as Heraclitus and Socrates considered fundamental to Greek thought. Heraclitus, writing in the late 6th century BCE, famously said of Apollo's oracle, "The Lord whose oracle is at Delphi neither speaks nor conceals, but gives a sign." It was this ambiguity, cryptic yet binding, that preserved its mystique across centuries. Even in the Roman period, when imperial power overshadowed the independent city-states of Greece, the Pythia retained her authority. Emperors, generals, and senators still sought her counsel, though the nature of questions evolved. Political decisions gave way to philosophical and personal inquiries, reflecting a world where oracles competed with emerging religions and shifting worldviews. Yet the ritual, the purification, the laurel, the fumes, the trembling voice, remained as it had for centuries, rooted in a tradition older than most of the temples that housed it. The Pythia was more than a figure of ritual. She was a living intersection of faith, politics, and the natural world. Her seat on the tripod was not a throne of command, but a precarious perch between human frailty and divine authority, sustained by rites honed over generations. To approach her was to risk being remade by words that might promise triumph or herald ruin. Phrases born in trance, framed by priests, and carried into history with the weight of destiny. Power at Delphi was never ceremonial. It was tangible, immediate, and dangerous. The words of the oracle could redirect armies, redraw borders, and determine whether entire cities would rise in triumph or vanish into ruin. Kings, generals, and envoys came not for reassurance but for instructions. Cryptic lines from a god whose voice passed through a mortal woman in trance. Decisions of empire began not in palaces or councils but in the shadowed chamber of Apollo's temple. The oracle's political weight was already evident in the 6th century BCE, when Greek city-states began to emerge from the rigid world of aristocratic rule into complex alliances and rivalries. Delphi became the arbiter of legitimacy, a neutral sanctuary whose divine authority was above faction and beyond reproach. Consultation with the oracle was not a matter of piety alone. It was a prerequisite for action. Colonization, warfare, lawgiving, each was sanctioned through Apollo's words, delivered by the Pythia and interpreted by priests who framed them into verses designed to endure scrutiny. One of the most striking episodes came on the eve of the Persian invasion of Greece. In 480 BCE, as Xerxes prepared his massive assault, Athens stood divided between resistance and surrender. Themistocles, the Athenian statesman and strategist, sought Delphi's guidance, knowing the oracle's response would shape not only Athenian policy but the survival of Greece itself. Her answer was grim. "Fly, wretched ones, to the ends of the earth. All is ruin. Fire and sword shall consume your city." The pronouncement carried the weight of finality, yet Themistocles pressed for a second reading, and the Pythia delivered another phrase, one that would change the course of history. "Though all else shall be taken, a wooden wall alone shall remain unconquered." Interpretation became everything. Many Athenians believed the wooden wall referred to the ancient palisades surrounding the Acropolis. Themistocles, however, saw another meaning, the wooden hulls of the Athenian navy. Under his leadership, Athens evacuated its population and prepared its fleet, luring the Persian navy into the Straits of Salamis, where the confined waters neutralized its advantage in numbers. The Greek victory there was decisive, and with it, the oracle's cryptic verse became legend, proof that divine counsel, properly understood, could preserve a civilization. The influence of Delphi extended beyond the theater of war. Colonization, the lifeblood of Greek expansion from the 8th to 6th centuries BCE, frequently began with consultation at the sanctuary. Founding a colony was not a simple act of navigation. It required divine sanction to ensure survival in unfamiliar lands. Cities such as Cyrene in North Africa, founded around 631 BCE, traced their origins to Delphic pronouncements. Herodotus records how Battus, the leader of the colonists, received a command from the oracle to settle the place of sheep pastures in Libya, and how the mission floundered until the prophecy was interpreted correctly. Only when the colonists followed Apollo's instructions precisely did Cyrene flourish, becoming one of the wealthiest cities of the Greek world. Other colonies, from the coast of Asia Minor to the western Mediterranean, carried similar stories. The oracle provided not only spiritual legitimacy but practical guidance. Where to land, which gods to honor, which local peoples to placate or avoid. These directives, couched in riddles, often reflected Delphi's access to extensive networks of information. Pilgrims, traders, and envoys from across the Greek world converged here, carrying news that could be woven into oracular pronouncements. Divine foresight shaped by worldly intelligence. Political alliances were also forged and broken under Delphi's influence. During the First Sacred War, circa 595 to 585 BCE, the Amphictyonic League, an association of tribes and city-states charged with protecting the sanctuary, waged war against the nearby city of Crisa for exploiting pilgrims traveling to Delphi. The conflict, though framed as religious, was fundamentally about control of the oracle's wealth and prestige. When the League emerged victorious, Delphi's independence was secured, and its authority as the supreme religious tribunal of Greece grew even stronger. From this period onward, city-states competed to outdo one another in dedications and monuments, each offering designed not only to honor Apollo but to advertise power and legitimacy. Sparta, too, turned to Delphi at pivotal moments. Before introducing its rigid legal system, tradition holds that the Spartan lawgiver Lycurgus consulted the oracle, who hailed him as beloved of the gods and sanctioned his radical reforms. This divine approval, whether historical or shaped by later legend, cemented the Spartan constitution as immutable law, defended not by reason alone but by Apollo's decree. Even in the shifting political landscape of the Hellenistic and Roman periods, Delphi retained its aura. When Philip II of Macedon rose to dominance in the 4th century BCE, he sought Apollo's blessing, making lavish dedications to the sanctuary. Roman generals and emperors, including Nero and Hadrian, later visited the oracle, though by then its pronouncements leaned toward philosophical reflections rather than grand strategic guidance. Still, the precedent held. A ruler who received Delphi's counsel stood cloaked in the authority of the god who had guided Greece through its most perilous hours. The impact of these consultations cannot be overstated. They were not mere rituals conducted for show. They were the fulcrum on which decisions of war and peace, settlement and survival, turned. The oracle's words did not simply reflect events. They shaped them, embedding divine sanction into the choices of mortals who commanded armies, launched fleets, and laid the foundations of cities destined to outlast their founders. Apollo was not a distant deity to the Greeks. He was the living force of reason, prophecy, and order, a god who bridged mortal ignorance and divine foresight. At Delphi, his presence was not symbolic. It was believed to be immediate, radiating from the sanctuary where his voice was said to emerge through the Pythia. The oracle's authority rested on this belief, a conviction woven into the rituals, festivals, and reverence that surrounded the god of prophecy. Apollo's association with Delphi stemmed from myth, yet it was reinforced through religious practice across centuries. In Greek tradition, he was the god who brought harmony after chaos, striking Python dead to claim the sanctuary as his own. But his domain extended beyond the sanctuary's mythic foundation. He was the patron of poetry, music, healing, and sacred law, making his oracle not merely a source of prophecy, but a place where divine wisdom touched multiple facets of human life. The Delphic sanctuary thus stood as a theological and cultural cornerstone, where Apollo's guidance shaped not only political decisions but spiritual identity. Festivals at Delphi reinforced his central role. The Pythian Games, second only to the Olympic Games in prestige, were held every 4 years, beginning in the 6th century BCE, and commemorated Apollo's victory over Python. These contests were not limited to athletics. They featured musical performances, poetry recitals, and dramatic presentations, reflecting Apollo's dual role as god of physical excellence and artistic inspiration. Victors received a laurel wreath, a sacred plant linked directly to Apollo, its significance rooted in the myth of Daphne, who transformed into a laurel tree to escape the god's pursuit. Each crown placed upon a victor's head was not a mere prize but a symbol of divine favor. Ritual offerings formed the backbone of daily devotion at Delphi. Pilgrims approached the sanctuary carrying gifts, statues, tripods, weapons, and ornate votives, intended to honor Apollo and secure his goodwill. The sacred way leading to the Temple of Apollo became lined with treasuries, small yet elaborate structures erected by various city-states to house their dedications. The treasury of the Athenians, built after their victory at Marathon in 490 BCE, displayed marble panels carved with scenes of heroic struggle, a public testament to Athens' devotion and to the oracle's authority in endorsing their cause. These offerings were not mere displays of wealth. They were transactions of faith, tokens exchanged for prophecy. The oracle herself was viewed as an instrument of Apollo's divine will. The Pythia did not speak as a woman. She spoke as the god. To question her was to question Apollo. Her pronouncements were often cryptic, framed in verses that invited multiple interpretations. Yet this ambiguity only strengthened their power. In the Greek worldview, the gods did not issue commands in mortal language. They hinted, warned, and guided through riddles that demanded wisdom to decode. This belief sustained the oracle's mystique, ensuring that her words carried weight not only as counsel but as sacred enigmas. Public perception of the oracle reached beyond Greece. As early as the 7th and 6th centuries BCE, rulers from Lydia, Egypt, and later Persia sent emissaries to consult her. Croesus of Lydia, famous for his ill-fated campaign against Persia, received his prophecy at Delphi around 546 BCE, a statement that promised he would destroy a great empire if he crossed the Halys River. He assumed it meant Persia's empire. It was his own. The story, recorded by Herodotus, illustrates not only the oracle's reputation but the peril of misreading divine words. The oracle's religious authority was reinforced by the Amphictyonic League, a council of city-states responsible for maintaining the sanctuary and protecting its sanctity. Their involvement was not purely administrative. It signaled a collective acknowledgement of Delphi's spiritual significance. Wars fought in defense of the sanctuary, such as the First Sacred War, circa 595 to 585 BCE, underscored its status as a sacred institution whose voice, Apollo's voice, transcended political boundaries. Ritual practices within the temple reflected this reverence. Purification in the Castalian spring, the burning of laurel, and the offering of sacrifices preceded each consultation, affirming that prophecy could only flow through ritual discipline. Even the temple's layout reinforced Apollo's supremacy. The Omphalos stone, positioned near the Ataton where the Pythia sat, marked Delphi as the center of the world. Inscribed maxims such as "Know thyself and nothing in excess," attributed to the 7 sages of Greece, adorned the temple entrance, presenting the sanctuary not merely as a source of prophecy, but as a repository of moral guidance. Belief in the oracle's divine nature endured because it was validated by events. Victories in war, the founding of cities, and the resolution of political crises were attributed to Apollo's counsel. Even in moments of failure, responsibility was laid not on the oracle but on human misinterpretation. Themistocles' reading of the wooden wall prophecy before the Battle of Salamis in 480 BCE became a celebrated example of correct interpretation leading to salvation, while Croesus' downfall stood as a warning against careless reading of divine words. The oracle's reputation extended into philosophy and literature. Plato referred to divine mania, the inspired madness of prophecy, as a sacred state, beyond the reach of human reasoning yet essential for accessing truth. Heraclitus described Apollo as a god who neither speaks nor conceals, but gives a sign, capturing the enigmatic quality of Delphic utterance. These reflections did not diminish the oracle's authority. They enshrined it as a central element of Greek thought, a reminder that divine wisdom spoke through riddles to preserve the balance between fate and free will. Even under Roman rule, when Delphi's political influence waned, its religious significance endured. Emperors like Nero and Hadrian consulted the oracle, seeking not grand political predictions but philosophical guidance. Yet the rituals and reverence remained unchanged. The Pythia still sat on her tripod, laurel leaves still burned, and the sanctuary still echoed with the weight of prophecy, sustaining a reputation built over nearly a millennium. Ancient writers left scattered yet compelling accounts of the strange forces at work in Delphi's Temple of Apollo. Plutarch, who served as a priest there in the late 1st century CE, described the presence of a pneuma, a sweet-smelling vapor, that rose from beneath the sanctuary, surrounding the Pythia as she entered her trance. Earlier sources hinted at the same phenomenon. Diodorus Siculus, Strabo, and Pausanias referenced the sacred fumes, though often indirectly, suggesting that they were known but never fully explained, their mystery inseparable from the divine aura of the oracle. These accounts, written centuries apart, converged on a single, striking idea. The words of Apollo flowed through an intoxicating breath rising from the earth itself. For much of modern scholarship, This detail was dismissed as poetic embellishment until geology intervened. In the late 20th century, a multidisciplinary team led by geologist Gel de Boer and archaeologist John Hale conducted an extensive study of the Delphic site. Their findings transformed the debate. Beneath the sanctuary lay the intersection of two geological fault lines, the Kurna Fault and the Delphi Fault, cutting through layers of bituminous limestone. These rock formations, when fractured, could release hydrocarbons, specifically ethylene gas, into the enclosed chamber of the temple's adyton. Ethylene is no ordinary vapor. In controlled doses, it induces euphoria, trance states, and alterations in speech, producing a sense of detachment from reality. At higher concentrations, it can cause unconsciousness or even death. The effects described by ancient sources, the Pythia trembling, her voice shifting into ecstatic tones, her words flowing as if from another source, align strikingly with ethylene's known neurochemical properties. Laboratory studies have demonstrated its ability to produce vivid sensory experiences and heightened suggestibility, conditions under which cryptic yet authoritative utterances could easily emerge. The geology of Delphi supports this conclusion with remarkable precision. The sanctuary was built directly above fissures that could vent these gases. Nearby springs, including the Castalian Spring, contain traces of hydrocarbons and other compounds associated with fault-related emissions. Earthquakes, frequent in the region, may have periodically opened or sealed the fissures, explaining why ancient writers noted that the oracle sometimes failed to deliver prophecies, a disruption possibly linked to changes in gas flow. The physical layout of the temple amplified the effect. The adyton, where the Pythia sat on her tripod, was an enclosed chamber with limited ventilation, ideal for concentrating the faint vapors seeping from the fissures below. Ancient descriptions of the sweet aroma match ethylene's faintly fruity scent, a sensory cue that would have reinforced the perception of divine presence. To the Greeks, the fragrance was not chemical. It was sacred, a sign of Apollo's breath rising from the earth. Neurochemistry provides further insight into how such an environment could shape the oracle's performance. Ethylene acts on the central nervous system, altering the brain's normal processing of language and memory. In the Pythia state, words may have emerged in fragmented rhythms, charged with emotional intensity yet devoid of conventional structure. Priests, trained in interpretation, recorded these utterances and framed them into verses suitable for public proclamation. This collaboration between trance-induced speech and human interpretation preserved the aura of divine mystery while ensuring the prophecies carried coherence and authority. The scientific evidence does not diminish the historical weight of the oracle. It intensifies it. The sanctuary was chosen with uncanny precision, its placement atop intersecting faults creating a physical channel through which the earth itself exhaled its invisible influence. The rituals, purification, laurel chewing, controlled consultation, may have evolved as practical safeguards, ensuring that the Pythia entered a heightened state without succumbing to the vapor's more dangerous effects. The trance was no mere performance. It was a physiological reality, rooted in geology and chemistry, yet interpreted through the lens of sacred tradition. Even the patterns of oracular activity align with geological logic. Ancient sources note that the oracle functioned only on specific days, primarily in the warmer months, and that there were times when no prophecy could be given. Variations in temperature, pressure, and seismic activity could easily regulate the release of gases, providing a natural explanation for these irregularities. Yet to the ancients, such fluctuations reflected the will of Apollo, who was believed to depart for Hyperborea during the winter, leaving Delphi silent. The investigation into Delphi's geology also reshaped understanding of ancient testimony. For centuries, scholars questioned why writers such as Herodotus and Plutarch would emphasize the presence of vapors if none existed. The absence of clear fissures or strong gas emissions at the modern ruins fueled skepticism. Yet studies conducted in the late 1990s revealed that earlier excavations had misidentified the temple's substructure and removed sediment that once sealed crucial fissures. Subsequent analysis of the surrounding limestone and spring waters confirmed hydrocarbon residues consistent with long-term emissions. The ancient accounts, once dismissed, proved more accurate than the modern doubts that had overshadowed them. The implications reach beyond geology and chemistry. The oracle's voice, cryptic, commanding, and feared, was shaped by forces that blurred the line between nature and divinity. The Pythia, seated on her tripod above a living fault, became the human medium through which this phenomenon found expression. Her trembling words carried the weight of Apollo not because of the gases alone, nor because of ritual alone, but because the two were inseparably fused within the cultural framework of Greek religion. The science does not explain away the oracle. It explains why her words resonated with such enduring authority. The Oracle of Delphi endured through centuries of political upheaval, yet the signs of decline began long before its final silencing. When the Romans absorbed Greece into their growing empire in 146 BCE, Delphi retained its prestige. Roman leaders, keen to associate themselves with Greek culture, did not suppress the sanctuary. They reinforced it. Emperors visited in person. Nero famously plundered over 500 statues from the sacred site in 67 CE, while Hadrian and Marcus Aurelius later sponsored its upkeep. Yet this patronage could not mask the reality that the oracle no longer held the same central place in shaping the future of nations. Its words still carried reverence, but their political force had begun to wane. By the 1st century CE, the oracle spoke into a world no longer defined by fiercely independent city-states but by the imperial machinery of Rome. Decisions of war and colonization were now issued by emperors and generals who wielded military intelligence rather than divine ambiguity. Still, the institution persisted, providing answers to personal dilemmas, religious inquiries, and state matters that carried symbolic weight. Plutarch, serving as a priest of Apollo around 90 to 120 CE, wrote of the oracle as still functioning but quieter than in its classical prime. He observed periods of silence, days when the sacred breath beneath the temple did not rise, and the Pythia's voice failed to appear, interpreting it as a sign of divine withdrawal, not geological change. The centuries that followed saw a slow erosion of the oracle's authority. Philosophers of late antiquity questioned the reliability of divine speech, and intellectual circles increasingly valued rational explanation over mystical insight. Yet it was not philosophy that would end the sanctuary's voice. It was the transformation of the religious world itself. Christianity, emerging in the 1st century CE and spreading relentlessly across the Roman Empire, brought a theology that rejected the old gods outright. Apollo, once the giver of prophecy and healer of nations, became to the new faith a false deity. His priestesses seen as conduits of deception rather than truth. Pressure mounted under Constantine I, who issued the Edict of Milan in 313 CE, granting religious tolerance but shifting imperial favor toward Christianity. Pagan temples were not yet closed, but their influence was curtailed. Prophecy, once a sacred bridge between mortals and gods, began to be framed as superstition or demonic influence. Yet Delphi persisted, its fading voice a remnant of a world that was slipping into memory. The final blow came under Emperor Theodosius I. Determined to unify the empire under Christianity, he issued a series of decrees between 391 and 394 CE that banned pagan rites and closed sanctuaries across the Roman world. The oracle, silent for long stretches by this time, gave what tradition holds to be its last recorded prophecy to a visiting official. "Tell the king, the fair hall has fallen. No longer has Phoebus a house, nor the prophesying laurel, nor the spring that speaks. The water is silent." Whether the words were truly spoken in Delphi or preserved through literary invention, they capture the stark reality. The voice of Apollo was gone. Archaeological evidence suggests the sanctuary remained partly active as a place of local reverence even after Theodosius's decrees. But without the Pythia, without the sacred rituals, it had become a monument rather than a living oracle. By the early 5th century, Christian bishops described the temple as an abandoned relic of a defeated faith. The fissures beneath the earth still existed. The Castalian spring still flowed. Yet the sacred flame that had defined Delphi for nearly a millennium had been extinguished. What lingered was its memory. In late antiquity, travelers and writers continued to visit the ruins, treating the site as both sacred and strange. A place where the grandeur of the past could be seen in the broken columns and hollow stones. The shift from living sanctuary to historical curiosity did not diminish its aura. It transformed it. No longer a voice of prophecy, Delphi became a testament to the world that had built it. A world where divine counsel shaped wars, colonies, and kingdoms, and where a woman seated above a fisher spoke with the authority of a god. The Oracle of Delphi did not vanish with the closing of its temple. It persisted, reshaped as symbol and metaphor, carrying meanings far beyond the sacred stone of Mount Parnassus. For centuries, its voice, once spoken through the Pythia, echoed in literature, philosophy, and cultural memory, not as a whisper from a forgotten god, but as a reflection of humanity's enduring search for guidance, knowledge, and faith. Writers of the ancient world preserved its reputation as a place where mortal limitations collided with divine insight. Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE, framed the oracle's pronouncements as threads in the tapestry of Greek history, shaping wars and voyages that altered the course of civilizations. Aeschylus and Sophocles, in their tragedies, infused the concept of prophecy with the weight of destiny, presenting the oracle not merely as a place of counsel but as an arbiter of human struggle against forces beyond comprehension. These narratives carried into the works of Plato, who used the oracle to illustrate philosophical concepts of wisdom and human limitation. In his Apology, Socrates recounts how the oracle declared him the wisest of men, not for possessing knowledge, but for knowing the limits of his own ignorance. It was a statement less about divine preference and more about the nature of truth itself. As the centuries advanced, the image of the oracle transformed from a specific religious site to a universal emblem. During the Hellenistic and Roman eras, poets and historians revisited its sayings, often reinterpreting them to fit new political and cultural landscapes. The cryptic wording of its prophecies, ambiguous by design, allowed each generation to find meaning suited to its own context. In Roman literature, it became a lens through which the past was understood, a reminder of how empires sought validation from divine sources before staking their destinies on war or governance. Even as Christianity rose and pagan sanctuaries faded, the concept of the oracle retained a curious fascination. Early Christian writers such as Clement of Alexandria and Eusebius criticized Delphi as a place of demonic deception, yet their very condemnation kept its memory alive. The oracle became a foil, proof of the old world's misguided faith, yet still worthy of reference because of its influence on centuries of human action. Its words, whether divine or delusional, were recognized as having steered armies, founded cities, and determined the lives of kings. In medieval Europe, long after the sanctuary lay in ruins, Delphi continued to inspire thought, not as a living institution but as a metaphor for the limits of human control over destiny. The Renaissance brought a revival of classical texts, and with them, renewed fascination with the oracle. Scholars like Marsilio Ficino and humanist thinkers pored over ancient writings, viewing Delphi as a site where philosophy and mysticism intertwined. It became emblematic of a world where reason and mystery coexisted, a concept that resonated deeply with thinkers who sought to reconcile classical learning with emerging scientific inquiry. By the 18th and 19th centuries, the oracle had fully entered the realm of historical reflection and scientific curiosity. European travelers and archaeologists, driven by the intellectual fervor of the Enlightenment, visited the ruins of Delphi, seeking to understand how a sanctuary once revered by kings had fallen silent. Reports of geological studies began to circulate, suggesting that natural forces, seismic fissures releasing hydrocarbon gases, may have played a role in inducing the trances of the Pythia. Scholars like Adolphe Paulop and later geologists in the 20th century pieced together evidence of ethylene and methane emissions beneath the site, linking ancient testimony of sweet-smelling vapors with modern chemical knowledge. The oracle was no longer solely a symbol of divine speech. It became an early intersection of religious practice and natural science. Yet its metaphorical weight remained undiminished. Writers of the modern era, from romantic poets who saw in it a symbol of lost grandeur, to philosophers who treated it as an emblem of human uncertainty, continued to draw meaning from Delphi. Friedrich Nietzsche invoked the oracle when questioning the nature of truth and illusion. T.S. Eliot wove echoes of its riddling ambiguity into his poetic meditations on fate and time. Even in contemporary literature and psychology, the oracle serves as shorthand for the search for insight in an unpredictable world. The enduring fascination lies not in whether Apollo truly spoke, nor in whether vapors rose from the earth, but in what the oracle represented, the human need to seek answers from beyond, the belief that destiny can be glimpsed if only the right words are spoken. This tension, between faith and reason, mysticism and science, has ensured that the oracle remains more than an archaeological site. It stands as a concept, a reminder that the ancient world wrestled with questions still unresolved. Whether knowledge is given by gods, uncovered by human inquiry, or born from the fragile space where belief and perception meet. Even now, Delphi provokes thought, not as a place where nations consult divine will, but as a testament to the complexity of human conviction. It lingers in history as a symbol of prophecy, fate, and the pursuit of wisdom, a voice that has never truly gone silent.